Somewhere around 3,000 years ago, before Rome, before the Bible was written down, a blind poet, or maybe a long chain of singers whose names we will never know, began telling a story around a fire. A story about a soldier trying to get home from a war. By every rule of history, it should have vanished. Almost everything from that world did. The kingdoms are dust. The gods they swore by have no temples left. And yet that one story is still here. We are still telling it. Right now, it is called the Odyssey. And at its heart, it is the simplest idea imaginable. A man just wants to go home. But between him and home stands a one-eyed giant, a witch who turns men into pigs, sea monsters, the temptation of living forever, and a god who has personally sworn to destroy him. It takes him 10 years. He loses every last man who sailed with him, and he refuses to stop. For 30 centuries, this story has refused to die. It outlived the civilization that made it. It shaped almost every adventure written after it. And people are still arguing today about whether parts of it actually happened. So tonight, we are going to do the whole thing, the entire journey from the ashes of Troy to the shores of Ithaca. And along the way, we will ask the real question, not just what happens in the Odyssey, but why out of everything the ancient world ever made, this is the one story that simply will not let us go. To understand why one man's journey home matters this much, you have to understand what he left behind and what he was coming back to. His name is Odysseus, king of Ithaca, a small rocky island off the west coast of Greece. Not the richest king, not the strongest. What set him apart was his mind. In a world that worshipped brute strength, Odysseus was the man who thought his way out. And it was his idea, the wooden horse, that finally ended the 10-year siege of Troy. The Greeks pretended to sail away, left a giant horse at the gates as an offering, and hid their best fighters inside it. The Trojans dragged it into the city themselves. That night, the men climbed out, opened the gates, and Troy burned. A war that 10 years of fighting could not win was ended by a single brilliant, ruthless trick. And that should have been the happy ending. The war was over. All he had to do was sail home to his wife and his son. That is where the real story begins. Because back on Ithaca, 20 years had already passed since Odysseus first left for the war. His son Telemachus had been a newborn when he sailed. Now he was a young man who had never once seen his father's face. And his wife Penelope was under siege of a different kind. Everyone assumed Odysseus was dead. He had to be. The war had ended. Other men had come home. He had not. So more than 100 young noblemen had moved into his palace, eating his food, drinking his wine, pressuring Penelope to give up and marry one of them. They were waiting for her to break. This was the home he was trying to reach, a house full of men who wanted him gone for good. But Odysseus did not know any of that yet. When he left the smoking ruins of Troy, he had 12 ships and a crew of veterans, and he thought he was going home. The first thing that happened set the pattern for everything after. They landed at a place called Ismarus, the city of a people called the Cicones. And Odysseus and his men did what soldiers fresh off a decade of war do. They raided it. They stormed the city, killed the men, took the plunder, the women, the wine. Odysseus wanted to grab what they could and leave immediately while they were ahead. His men refused. They were drunk on victory and wine, and they stayed on the beach to feast. That was the mistake. The Cicones who had escaped went inland, gathered reinforcements, and came back at dawn. Hardened fighters, more of them, better organized. By the time Odysseus fought his way back to the ships, he had lost 6 men from every single vessel. 72 men gone before the journey home had truly even started. It is worth stopping on that because it tells you what kind of story this is. This is not a hero who wins. This is a man who survives and pays for every mile. Then the sea itself turned on them. Zeus sent a storm that tore the sails to rags and drove the ships for days across open water, completely lost. When it finally broke, they were somewhere no Greek map could name. And this is the moment the Odyssey stops being a war story and becomes something stranger. A journey off the edge of the known world into a place where the normal rules stop applying. The first shore they reached in that unknown region belonged to a people called the Lotus-Eaters. Not monsters, not warriors. just people who lived on the fruit of a single plant, the lotus. Odysseus sent 3 men ahead to make contact. The Lotus-Eaters welcomed them, no violence at all, and simply offered them the fruit to eat. And the men who tasted it forgot everything. Not their memories exactly. They forgot that they wanted to go home. The desire itself just dissolved. They sat down on that shore, content, and had to be physically dragged back to the ships, weeping and tied down under the rowing benches so they could not swim back. Think about what that means as the first real trial. Before any monster, before any god, the very first threat to a man trying to get home is the temptation to simply stop wanting it, to be comfortable enough that you forget what you were fighting for. The Odyssey puts that danger first on purpose. Odysseus got them out, back onto the water, still pointed toward Ithaca, and somewhere ahead, on the next island, was a cave. A very large cave, full of sheep and cheese and no sign of who it belonged to. His men wanted to grab the food and run. Odysseus, for once, wanted to wait and meet the owner. It was the single worst decision he would ever make. The island belonged to the Cyclopes, a race of one-eyed giants who kept no laws, farmed nothing, built nothing, and answered to no one. The cave Odysseus walked into belonged to the largest of them, Polyphemus, a son of Poseidon, god of the sea. That detail is the hinge the entire story turns on, though Odysseus did not know it yet. He took 12 of his best men and a skin of unusually strong wine and went into the cave to wait for its owner, because that was the custom of his world. You met a stranger, you offered a gift, you received one. Odysseus expected hospitality. What came home instead was a monster the size of a mountainside, who drove his flock in, then sealed the entrance with a boulder so massive that no 20 men could have shifted it. They were trapped. And that was the problem. Even if they killed him in his sleep, they would die in that cave because only Polyphemus was strong enough to move the door. Then the giant woke, saw the men, and asked who they were. Odysseus asked politely for the guest gift the gods demanded. Polyphemus laughed. He said the Cyclops cared nothing for the gods, and to prove it, he snatched up 2 of the men, smashed them against the ground, and ate them whole. He did it again the next morning. 2 more. Odysseus was trapped with a creature that could not be fought and could not be reasoned with. So he did the only thing he had ever been good at. He thought. First, the name. When the giant asked what he was called, Odysseus said his name was Nobody. Then he offered Polyphemus the strong wine, cup after cup, until the giant passed out drunk. While he slept, Odysseus and his men took a massive olive wood stake, hardened the tip in the fire, and drove it into the Cyclops' single eye, leaning on it, turning it like a drill. Polyphemus woke screaming, blind. The other Cyclops on the island heard him and came running to the cave, shouting through the sealed door, "Who is hurting you?" And the blinded giant roared back the truth. "Nobody! Nobody is killing me!" So they shrugged and went home. Why call for help against nobody? That is the mind of Odysseus in one move. He didn't just blind the giant, he built the trap into a word. If you have made it this far into the story, you already understand what this channel is. We take one enormous story, a whole myth, a whole civilization, a whole buried history, and we walk through every piece of it honestly in one sitting. We put out something like this every single day. If that is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribing is what keeps it coming. That is all. Now, back to the cave, because the hardest part was getting out alive. The door was still blocked, but in the morning the blind giant had to let his sheep out to graze, feeling each animal's back as it passed to make sure no man rode out on top. So Odysseus tied his men underneath the rams, clinging to the wool of their bellies, and rode out that way, hidden beneath the animals, while Polyphemus stroked the backs and felt nothing. They made it to the ships. They were free. And here Odysseus made the mistake that would cost him everything. As the ship pulled away, safe, he could not resist. He stood up and shouted his real name across the water, that it was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, who had blinded him. He needed the giant to know who had beaten him, pride. And that single act of pride handed his enemy the one weapon that could truly hurt him. Because now Polyphemus knew the name, and he lifted his hands to his father Poseidon, god of the sea, and prayed a curse, that Odysseus never reach home. Or if the fates would not allow that, then let him come home late and broken, having lost all his companions on a stranger's ship to find nothing but trouble in his own house. Read that curse again, because it is not just a curse, it is the plot. Everything that happens for the rest of the Odyssey, every year lost, every man drowned, every delay, is the sea itself answering that prayer. Poseidon heard his son, and from that moment, the most powerful force in the ancient world had personally decided that this one man would not go home. Odysseus had walked into that cave a conqueror, fresh from winning the greatest war of the age. He sailed away from it with a god as his enemy, and the certainty that the ocean between him and Ithaca would now fight him for every mile. He still had 11 ships. He would not keep them for long. What comes next is the cruelest stretch of the whole journey, because more than once Odysseus gets close enough to home to see it, and loses it anyway. The first time is because of a gift. They come to a floating island ruled by Aeolus, the keeper of the winds. Aeolus likes Odysseus, hosts him for a month, and gives him a parting gift unlike anything in the ancient world. A leather bag containing all the storm winds of the sea, tied shut, leaving only the gentle west wind free to push them straight home. It is a guaranteed voyage. For 9 days and nights they sail, and on the 10th day, Ithaca appears on the horizon, close enough that they can see the fires of men on the shore. Odysseus, who has not slept the entire time, finally lets himself rest. That is when his own crew destroys him. They have watched him guard that bag the whole voyage, and they have decided it must be full of gold and silver he means to keep for himself. So while he sleeps, with home in sight, they open it. Every storm wind on earth explodes out at once. The hurricane seizes the ships and hurls them all the way back across everything, back to Aeolus's island. And this time, Aeolus takes one look at them and refuses. A man dragged back like this, he says, must be hated by the gods themselves. He will not help a man the gods have cursed, and he sends them away. Think about that. They were close enough to see the smoke from their own homes, and they threw it away over a bag they were too suspicious to leave shut. It gets worse. The next island belongs to the Laestrygonians, and they are giants and they are cannibals. Most of the fleet sails trustingly into a narrow, sheltered harbor. It is a trap. The giants line the cliffs above and rain down boulders, smashing the ships in the water, then spear the struggling men like fish and carry them off to eat. Odysseus had kept his own ship moored outside the harbor mouth, and only that saved him. He cuts the rope and runs. When the water goes still, he has one ship left. Out of 12 that left Troy, 11 are gone, and every man on them. That single ship reaches the island of Aeolus and the home of Circe, a goddess and a witch. Odysseus sends half his remaining men ahead to scout. Circe welcomes them warmly, sits them down, feeds them a rich meal, and the food is drugged. She touches them with her wand, and one by one they become pigs. Real pigs, penned in her yard, with the minds of men still trapped inside, weeping. One man hung back outside, suspicious, and escaped to bring the news. Odysseus goes alone to save them, and on the path he is stopped by the god Hermes, who hands him a plant, a herb called moly, that makes him immune to her magic. So when Circe tries to transform him, nothing happens, and for the first time she meets a man she cannot control. He forces her to swear an oath and to change his men back. She does, and then strangely they stay. Circe becomes an ally, even a lover, and life on her island is soft and safe and endless. A full year passes. It takes his own men finally to shake him, to remind him that safety is not the same as home. But before Circe will let him leave, she tells him something terrible. To find the way back, he must first sail to the very edge of the world and go down into the land of the dead. This is the strangest and oldest feeling part of the poem. Odysseus performs the ancient rite at the mouth of the underworld, and the spirits of the dead rise up to meet him. He has come to consult one soul, the blind prophet Tiresias, who warns him of what is coming, that he may still reach home, but only if, whatever happens, his men do not touch the cattle of the sun god. Touch that herd, and the ship is lost, and he comes home alone, broken, to a house full of trouble. The same shape as the Cyclops' curse, spoken again. But it is the other ghosts that break him. His own mother comes forward, and Odysseus did not even know she was dead. She died of grief, waiting for a son who never came back. 3 times he tries to take her in his arms, and 3 times she slips through them like smoke. He meets the ghost of Achilles, the greatest warrior of the war, who tells him he would rather be a landless slave among the living than king over all the dead. Down there, glory means nothing. Only life means anything. Odysseus climbs back toward the light with the prophet's warning ringing in his ears. Ahead lay the sea again, and the 3 deadliest trials of the entire voyage, waiting one after another. Before he left, Circe told him exactly what was waiting, in order, like a map of his own suffering. And knowing did not make it any easier. The first was the Sirens. Everyone thinks they know this one, but the detail that matters gets lost. The Sirens were not just beautiful voices. What they sang was knowledge. They promised that any man who listened would learn everything. All that had happened at Troy, all that would ever happen anywhere on earth. That was the lure, not lust. The temptation to know it all. And every man who steered toward that promise wrecked on the rocks and rotted there in a heap of bones. Odysseus wanted to do something no one had ever done, hear the song and live. So he had his men soften beeswax and plug their own ears until they were completely deaf. Then he ordered them to tie him upright to the mast and told them that no matter what he did, no matter how he begged, they were to row straight ahead and, if anything, bind him tighter. And that is exactly what happened. When the song reached him, it was so unbearably sweet that he strained against the ropes and screamed at his men to turn the ship, to set him free. And they could not hear a word of it. They only saw his face, and they leaned harder on the oars. He heard the whole song. He is the only man in the story who ever did. And it nearly killed him, even tied to a post. Then came the strait, and a choice with no good answer. On one side was Charybdis, a monstrous whirlpool that swallowed the entire sea down its throat 3 times a day and vomited it back up. Anything caught in it was simply gone. On the other side, in a high cave, lived Scylla, a thing with 6 heads on 6 long necks, each mouth full of teeth, that reached down and plucked sailors off passing ships. Circe's advice had been merciless. Hug Scylla's cliff, because Charybdis takes everyone. Scylla only takes 6, and Odysseus made a decision that tells you what leadership actually costs in this story. He did not tell his crew about Scylla. If they knew 6 of them were about to die no matter what, they would panic, drop the oars, and hide below, and then the whirlpool would take all of them. So he let them row on, believing they could all make it, knowing 6 of them could not. As they passed, Scylla struck. 6 men were snatched up into the air, screaming his name, reaching down for him as they were lifted to the cave. He said later it was the most pitiful thing he saw in all his wanderings, and he did the only thing a commander could do. He kept the ship moving. He let them die so the rest could live. Which brings us to the last warning, the one that had been repeated to him twice now. The island of the sun god, Helios, where a sacred herd of cattle grazed, that must not be touched. Odysseus wanted to sail straight past it, but his men were shattered, starving, and they swore they only needed 1 night ashore to rest. He gave in, and he made every man swear a solemn oath not to lay a hand on the cattle. Then the wind turned against them and pinned them on that island. Not for a night, for a month. Their food ran out. They fished and hunted birds until there was nothing left, and slowly they began to starve to death. And one day, while Odysseus was asleep, because sleep is the thing that undoes him again and again, the man Eurylochus made the argument that any death is better than starving. Better to die with a full stomach and take their chances with the gods. So they took the sun god's cattle, and they slaughtered them, and they feasted. The signs were monstrous. The flayed hides twitched and crawled along the ground. The meat on the spits lowed like living animals. For 6 days they ate anyway, and Helios went to Zeus and demanded justice, or he would take the sun itself down to shine among the dead. Zeus agreed. The moment they finally left that island and lost sight of land, the sky went black, and Zeus threw down a single thunderbolt. It shattered the ship. Every man who had eaten the cattle drowned in the wreck, exactly as the prophet said they would. Only Odysseus was left, because only he had kept the oath. He lashed the broken keel and mast together and rode the wreckage, and the sea swept him back toward the whirlpool of Charybdis, where he clung to an overhanging fig tree until the timbers were spat back up and pulled himself onto them again. He drifted alone for 9 days, no ship, no crew, not one man left of the 600 who had sailed from Troy. Just Odysseus on a plank until the current carried him to an island, and to the one person who would keep him longest of all. The island was called Ogygia, and the woman who found him half drowned on its shore was a goddess named Calypso. She took him in, healed him, and then she kept him for 7 years. This is the longest stop in the entire journey, and it is the strangest, because nothing about it looks like a trial. Calypso was beautiful and immortal. Her island wanted for nothing, and she loved him, and she made him an offer that no other human in mythology is recorded as refusing. She offered to make him a god, ageless, deathless, to live forever beside her, never to grow old, never to die. All he had to do was stop trying to go home, and he said no. Homer is not subtle about what this means, because it is the whole point of the poem. Every single day, Odysseus walked down to the shore and sat on the rocks and wept, staring out at the empty sea in the direction of Ithaca. He had immortality in his hand and he pushed it away. He chose to be a mortal man who would age and sicken and one day die, as long as he could do it at home, in his own house, growing old beside his wife. He chose a real, mortal, ending life over a perfect, endless one. The ancient world's greatest survivor looked at the offer of never dying and decided that a life without home was not worth having. He might have stayed trapped there forever, because a goddess does not have to let you go. But on Olympus, the goddess Athena, who had watched over Odysseus the whole time, finally pressed his case in front of Zeus while Poseidon was away, and Zeus agreed. He sent the messenger god down to Ogygia with an order Calypso could not refuse. Let the man go. She was bitter about it. She pointed out fairly that the gods take mortal lovers whenever they please and no one stops them. But she obeyed. She gave Odysseus tools, and he built himself a small raft. And for the first time in 7 years, he sailed east, toward home alone. He almost made it. He was 17 days at sea and had actually sighted land when Poseidon, coming back and spotting him, realized the other gods had freed his enemy behind his back. And he was furious. He gathered the winds and smashed the raft apart in a storm meant to finish him for good. Odysseus was thrown into the water and would have drowned, except a sea goddess took pity and gave him a magic veil to keep him afloat. He swam for 2 days and nights, battered against rocks, until he crawled ashore, naked, salt-caked, more dead than alive, on the island of the Phaeacians. And the Phaeacians are important because they are the mirror image of everything he has met. Everyone else on this journey either tried to eat him, enslave him, or keep him. The Phaeacians were a peaceful, wealthy, seafaring people who lived by exactly the law the Cyclops had laughed at. You take in the stranger, you feed him, you help him home. The young princess Nausicaa found him on the beach, and instead of running from the wild-looking man, brought him to her parents' palace. The king and queen took him in without even knowing his name. That night at the feast, a blind singer stood up to entertain the hall, and the song he chose was about the fall of Troy, about the wooden horse and the Greek who devised it. And Odysseus, sitting at the table, pulled his cloak over his face and wept, because the singer was singing about him and did not know he was in the room. The king saw the tears and finally asked the question the whole story has been circling. Who are you? Why does this song make you weep? And Odysseus told them. He said his name out loud, I am Odysseus. And then he told them everything. The Cyclops, the bag of winds, Circe and the pigs, the land of the dead, the Sirens Scylla, the sun god's cattle, Calypso. Everything we have just walked through he told at that table to a room of strangers as the only living witness to any of it. They believed him. And these were no ordinary sailors. Their ships were said to need no steersman and to cross the sea faster than thought. They loaded him with more treasure than he had ever taken from Troy, put him aboard, and while he slept the whole way across, they carried him home. They laid him gently on the shore of Ithaca, still sleeping, with his treasure stacked beside him, and slipped away. He woke on the soil of his own kingdom for the first time in 20 years, and he did not recognize it. The hardest part of the entire story was about to begin, because reaching home, it turns out, was not the same as taking it back. He did not march into his palace and announce himself. He had been gone 20 years, and his house was full of armed men who wanted him dead. So the goddess Athena disguised him, turned him into a ragged old beggar, bent and gray, so that he could walk into his own kingdom unseen and learn who had stayed loyal and who had not. He went first to the hut of a swineherd named Eumaeus, an old servant who did not recognize the beggar at his door, and who fed him anyway, shared what little he had, and spoke with grief and love about the master he was sure had died at sea. A poor man honoring a stranger, while 100 noblemen ate the king's own herds a mile away. The whole moral world of the poem is in that contrast. It was there that Odysseus reunited with his son. Telemachus, now grown, had gone searching for news of his father and come home empty-handed. Alone in the hut, Athena lifted the disguise for a moment, and Odysseus told the young man the truth. "I am your father." Telemachus could barely believe it. He had never known the man. And then the two of them, father and son, meeting as adults for the first time, sat down together and planned the reckoning. Odysseus entered his own hall still dressed as a beggar, and his own guests threw furniture at him, mocked him, kicked him, the suitors eating his food, insulting a starving old man in the house they were trying to steal. He took all of it. He let them. Because he was counting, he was learning every face, every name, deciding exactly who would answer for it. And then came the moment that has undone readers for 3,000 years. Lying in the filth by the gate was an old dog named Argos. Odysseus had raised him as a puppy before he left for Troy, 20 years earlier. Now the dog was ancient, neglected, riddled with fleas, tossed aside on a heap of dung. But when the disguised Odysseus passed, Argos knew him. Instantly. The one soul in all of Ithaca to recognize the king on sight was the dog. He could not get up. He only lifted his ears and wagged his tail, and Odysseus had to turn his face away and wipe away a tear so that no one would see. And Argos, having held on through 20 years just to see his master come home one last time, laid his head down and died. He had waited for exactly that, and the moment it came, he could let go. The end came through a contest. Penelope, every bit as clever as her husband, announced that she would finally choose a new husband, whoever could string the great bow of Odysseus and shoot an arrow cleanly through the sockets of 12 axe heads set in a row. It was his bow, and no one there had the strength or the skill to even bend it. One after another, the suitors strained and failed, and could not so much as string it. Then the beggar asked to try. The hall erupted in laughter and contempt. The filthy old man wanted the bow, but Telemachus insisted he be given his turn, and Odysseus took the great bow in his hands and strung it as easily as a musician stringing a lyre, and sent a single arrow straight through all 12 axes. Then he stood and threw off the rags, and they saw who he was. What followed was not a duel, it was a reckoning. With his son beside him and the loyal herdsmen and Athena over them, Odysseus sealed the hall and killed the suitors, all of them, the men who had eaten his house and dishonored his wife and plotted to murder his son. It was total, and it was merciless. And when it was done, he dealt with the servants who had betrayed the household too. The house was his again, cleansed in blood. And yet the most moving test was still to come, and it was Penelope who said it. She had been lied to by hope too many times to fall for it now, even with the man standing in front of her. So she laid a trap of her own. She casually ordered a servant to move their marriage bed out of the bedchamber for him, and Odysseus reacted with a flash of real anger, because that bed could not be moved. He had built it himself years ago, carving it from a living olive tree still rooted in the earth, with the whole room constructed around it. To move it, you would have to cut through the trunk. Only two people alive knew that secret, Odysseus and Penelope. And when he described it, furious that someone might have hacked apart the bed he made, she knew. That was the proof no disguise could fake and no imposter could know. Her knees went weak and she ran to him, and after 20 years she wept in his arms. The soldier had made it home, not to a place, to a person. And that, in the end, was the only thing he had ever been sailing toward. So we come back to the question we started with. Why this story? Out of everything the ancient world made, why is this the one that refuses to die? Part of the answer is that pieces of it turned out to be real. For most of history, people assumed Troy, the city where the whole thing starts, was pure invention, a fairy tale setting. Then in the 1870s, a businessman named Heinrich Schliemann, following a clue from an amateur named Frank Calvert, put his shovel into a hill called Hisarlik in northwestern Turkey and hit a city. Not one city, in fact, but the ruins of many, built and burned and rebuilt on the same spot across thousands of years. Some of the layers dating right back to the Bronze Age when the war was supposed to have happened. That does not prove the Trojan War went the way Homer says, and it certainly does not prove Odysseus existed. Be honest about that. But it proved the poem was anchored to a real place, in a real age, that the world of the Odyssey was not conjured out of nothing. Ever since people have tried to map the rest of the voyage onto the real Mediterranean, the whirlpool of Charybdis onto the Strait of Messina, the land of the Cyclops onto Sicily, and there is a long-running argument about where the real Ithaca even was, with some researchers insisting the Ithaca of the poem does not match the island that carries the name today. The truth is there is no agreement, and the fantastical stops, the witch, the giant, the land of the dead, resist any map at all. That is part of the fascination. The story sits right on the border between history and myth and refuses to fully commit to either side. And the text itself keeps surprising us. In 2018, archaeologists working near the Temple of Zeus at Olympia announced they had found a clay tablet inscribed with 13 verses from Book 14 of the Odyssey, the lines about the loyal swineherd. It was hailed as possibly the oldest written extract of the poem ever found on Greek soil. The honest footnote is that even older fragments of Homer, written on papyrus, have been dug out of the sands of Egypt. So this was not the oldest copy in the world, but it was a stunning reminder that this poem has been physically copied and treasured and carried for well over 2,000 years by people who felt exactly what you might feel hearing it now. Because here is the real reason it survives. Strip away the monsters and the gods, and the Odyssey is about the oldest wish a human being has. It is about wanting to go home. It is about a man who has offered the two things people supposedly crave most, endless pleasure and life without death, and who turns both of them down because neither one is home. It is about coming back after so long and so changed that at first no one knows you, and the ache of waiting to be recognized by the people you love. The Greeks had a word for that homecoming, nostos. It is the root of our word nostalgia, the pain of wanting to return. That is why it never went away. 3,000 years later, we are still making it. James Joyce rebuilt the entire thing as a single day in Dublin and called it Ulysses. The Coen brothers turned it into a film in the American South. The word Odyssey itself became our word for any long, hard journey home. Every story about a soldier coming back from war, every tale of a traveler fighting to return to the people who are waiting, is drinking from this well, whether it knows it or not. The blind poet by the fire is long gone. The kingdom of Ithaca is a few stones on a hillside. But the story he told about a man who lost everything, refused immortality, and clawed his way home across 10 years in a hostile sea just to sleep in his own bed beside his wife, that story is still here, still being told, still after 3,000 years, refusing to die. If you made it this far, you already know this isn't the kind of channel that's going anywhere. We put out something like this every single day. The version of the story that survives contact with the actual evidence. Subscribing keeps you in that loop. And if this one stayed with you, send it to 5 people who'd sit through something this long with you. Not everyone will. Some people do. Leave a comment, a real one. Tell me what part of this actually surprised you. And tell me what civilization, what forgotten sight, What quiet piece of hidden history you want us to look at next? We'll be here tomorrow, still digging.